Dear students, welcome back. Let us see the discussion on 17 February 2016. The first article is related to G. Sampath, who is an anti-national. Now, in the rising of nationalistic questions and right-wing nationalism, so what exactly a national has to do? And the questions of nationalism are rising. And nationalism, it does mean a single ideology centered around revering what the government does is good. Our nationalism is reduced to supporting a government of the day. Our nationalism is about having a critical debate in a democratic space and the ideals of the constitution. So in this context, historically if you see, the fascism, Nazism, these are centered around the nationalism, extreme sense of nationalism. So across, there is a book written by German historian Arthur Rosenberg, that is Fascism as a Mass Movement. In this he says that the fascism as an extreme nationalism is spread by two things. One is growth of right-wing politics, and the second thing is the association between the state and the people who claim themselves as the self-perpetuated nationalists. So in this context, if you see the ongoing debate in India, yes, there is a right-wing politics growth, and the next is there are few people who claim themselves to be the nationalists and they propagate their own view of the nationalism. So in the further to this, the debate on the economic front, the author tries to link it to the political front. So one way we are supporting the economic neoliberal policies. On the other way, on the political side, we are debating the democratic space which is weakening. So these are not disconnected from each other. So the economic space is making the Dalits to get away from their mainstream livelihood opportunities. So in this context, as their voice is getting crippled, to that extent the democratic space is also decreasing. So the liberal minds, they are not seeing critically how these two spaces are connected, the political space and economic space of the country. So the right-wing nationalism and economic space of neoliberal policies, and finally, whatever the so-called violence surrounding RLs, self-certification of the nationalism, and promotion of a particular view of a nationalism or a nationalistic thought, all these are going to degrade the value of human life. So in this context, we need to have a critical thinking about our prospects as a nation. The next is JNU and idea of an university, idea of an India. So now, again my thought is this, any university, it has to be a space for critical thinking, development of a perspective, and an individual or a man from a boy. So everything has to happen with regard to the boundaries of the university. A university is a microcosm of a society where it functions. And the JNU is quite an example to this. Now if you see, across the country there are only few institutions of excellence like JNU, which provides for a democratic space for debate and dissent. Now I do had a chance to visit this university. I can say that it is always dynamic and flourishing with thoughts. Now in this context, I can say in the midst of emergency during Indira Gandhi era, the author says is this, there was, even those days, the political and social debate went unabated or uncontrolled. It cultivates the dissent as a virtue or a value, and the networked alumni of JNU gives it wider respect and opportunities for its students. And time and again, JNU stood for an idea or India that is inclusive and that is dependent or that is centered around the development of everyone concerned, which is against the discrimination of Dalits, weak and marginalized, and which has provided for the social and women movement, gender movements, environmental movements in the country. And finally, it is sufficiently cosmopolitan and socially redistributive. So, it means whatever our constitutional ideals we have, these are centered to the so-called as the ethos cultivated in JNU. So I can say that JNU is an incubator for national building. and added to that. So with regard to the development of the disciplinary aspects, the interdisciplinary understanding of issues and development of a wider perspective of thinking, and introduction to the new ideas and thoughts, making the people to act as the change agents to the society, all these are nurtured in this place. So it means that an university, a public university's objective is to nurture a collective sense of belonging and also nurture what are the ideals and values this country runs on, and JNU does this part of job, and the culture and environment in JNU is synonymous with the idea of India and the values of our constitution. Now coming to the clean and sustainable cities. Under Swachh Bharat recently, the rankings were given to the clean cities. It is a welcomable step. So what are the reasons why the cities are unable to manage their solid waste and the sanitation is not up to expected? So providing for the drinking water, maintaining the sanitation and solid waste management, these are the major functions of any municipal administration. But however, if you see the Indian cities, the sanitation is up to 63%, solid waste management capability occurs only 20%. It shows the dismal state. So the urban governance now has sufficient finances in the form of Swachh Bharat cess, etc. What we need is a robust governance to take the policies and programs of the government forward. So capability building is critical for the municipal administration. Now coming to the Justice Karnan case. Now I'm not going into the merit of this case, but so I'll just brief you this way. So the transfer of him from Madras High Court to the Kolkata High Court, it was stayed by himself. The Chief Justice has to intervene not to allocate any work for him. So in this context, let us see the limitations of the judicial functioning. So in spite of him obstructing or showing an indecent behavior under the cover of a caste, still the judiciary is unable to do anything to him. So it shows the limitations of the appointment of through collegial systems and limitations to discipline the erring judges. On the other hand, it also shows the misuse of the SCST, Prevention of the Atrocities Act, by few well-learned men. So in this context, so the judiciary has to rethink about its appointment procedures and also providing for an alternative methods other than a removal of the judge being the only solution which is available today towards disciplining an erring judge. So this has to be given a serious consideration. Now coming to the economy part. Now in early 2000 to 2008, we have very good progress or growth of the economy. What have facilitated that? We know that private investment and private corporate expenditure, public investment, public expenditure, exports, all these have provided for the growth prospects. What are the weaknesses of that phase of the growth? The growth is not sectorally equal. It is mostly concentrated in the services sector. And next, second is the employment generation is not up to the expected levels. So in this context, today we are seeing something called as fall in growth. And though India is performing relatively better when compared to the other countries, still there is something of an fear among the economists. So in this context, let us see what are the challenges. 2008, the recession was set in. It was majorly due to the rise in oil prices. And today, the fall in oil prices and other commodity prices and weak global demand are cited as the reasons. So, after this, what the government has to do to face this situation where Indian exports are falling and demand is weakening? So, we have to nurture the domestic demand, aggregate domestic demand. For this, the investment has to flow from the government. And the investment has to flow to those areas where the private will not be interested to come even in the long run. So such as infrastructure, research, etc. Does that not increase the fiscal deficit? So what the author argues is we fear that the increase in physical deficit will not attract the foreign investments. But however, the more than the foreign investments, we have to use our internal capabilities as an economy to sustain. So the author argues for something kind of raising the fiscal deficit to an extent and boosting the public investment towards the long-term expenditure, which can finally lead to the building of the aggregate demand in our economy. Coming to the GM crops, now the genetically modified crops, yes, we are not allowed in India at all. But however, across the globe, Brazil, everywhere, the GM corn is the major crop. There are no more non-GM crops being cultivated. Now, India wants to import a non-GM crop, and all the supply chains of agricultural inputs, especially corn inputs, they are filled with the genetically modified crops. I can say that from Indian perspective, they are contaminated with GM crops. Now, any that crop coming into India may enter into our food chain. Probably it may contaminate the entire agricultural growth in the country or agricultural scenario in the country. So these are the new fears. So as we are becoming more and more dependent economy, so as the food security concerns are increasing, ourselves shielding from the GM crops is going to be a major debate today. So these are the important articles for today. And Vodafone tax issue again is in rise. Try to go through that particular thing from the previous videos. And NCERT tests are being posted. And please go and do the NCERT test properly. And those questions appear to be simple, but I tried to trick a bit with regard to the optionals which are being given to you, the choices which are being given to you. So those questions are purely from the NCERT textbooks only. Try to read the NCERT and practice those questions. So now let's get back into the prelims mode. Right? Thank you very much. All the best.